Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. So today we are discussing about the May 28th conversation, and that is because I opened up this book. This is the book that was put out by Iskcon, the official position book put out by the Iskcon GBC some years ago, quite some years back. This was in response to the Final Order book put out, which was establishing that Prabhupada wanted the system of initiation called the officiating Acharya ritvik system, where initiates are initiated on behalf of Srila Prabhupada, and new initiates become his disciples. So that was the Final Order book. In response to that was put out this pretty fat book called 100 Deviations of Ritvikism, put out by the GBC. So I have analyzed both. I've analyzed all papers put out on both sides and all of Prabhupada's instructions in this regard to try to fully understand myself what actually, Prabhupada has intended and what actually is Prabhupada's instructions on the matter. So today when I opened up this book, I sort of, just divinated and asked, prayed to the Lord, Prabhupada, what should I speak on this? So, and by the way, all of the points in this book, 100 Deviations of Ritvikism, there are counter points to be made that can make more sense, actually, that I consider to be much more strong, higher understanding than this. So there's basically just, there's these two ways of looking at this. You can take certain things that Prabhupada said and then other things that Prabhupada said and get a different understanding. So let's look at this May 28th conversation, because this is one of the main points that Iskcon has used as evidence that Prabhupada wanted this multiple guru initiator guru system. And so on May 28th, they met with Prabhupada in Vrindavan, the GBC. They wanted to ask him specifically, how initiations would go on in the future. Prabhupada was he was in ill health at the time. And this was only a few months. This was in May. Prabhupada's physical departure was in November. So it was already evident that Prabhupada's health was declining, and devotees were expecting that, sooner Prabhupada may pass on soon. So the GBC met with him in May 28th in Vrindavan to ask him specifically about how he would, how initiations would go on. And this is a conversation. You've probably seen it before. If you haven't, you can see the whole conversation here on our website, prabhupadinitiation.blogspot.com, where we go through each and every point, chapter by chapter, and it covers this whole subject matter in full. So let's read this section of the conversation. Now, again, for many devotees, this conversation can be a little bewildering because what is said there can be interpreted in different ways, but we're going to look at evidences that go contrary to the point that is given in this 100 Deviations of Ritvikism book, which uses this conversation as evidence that Prabhupada wanted his disciples to be initiating spiritual masters and initiate their own disciples. So May 28th, 1977, Satsvarup asks then this is asking Prabhupada, then our next question concerns initiations in the future, particularly at the time when you're no longer with us. We want to know how first and second initiations would be conducted. Prabhupada, yes, I shall select some of you, after this is settled up, I shall select some of you to act as officiating acharyas. Officiating acharyas. Tamal Krishna, is that called ritvik acharya? Prabhupada, ritvik, yes. Sattvarup, then what is the relationship of that person who gives initiation? And the Prabhupada, he's guru. Sattvarup, but he does it on your behalf. Prabhupada, yes. That is formality, because in my presence one should not become guru, so on my behalf, on my order. Amara Jnana Guru Hana, be actually guru, but by my order. Sattvarup, so they may also be considered your disciples. Prabhupada, yes, they are disciples. Why consider? Who? Tamal Krishna, no, he's asking that these ritvik acharyas, they're officiating giving diksha. They're the people who they give diksha to, whose disciples are they? Prabhupada, they're his disciple. Tamal Krishna, they're his disciple. Prabhupada, who is initiating? He is grand disciple. Satsvarup, yes. Tamal Krishna, that's clear. Satsvarup, then we have a question concerning Prabhupada. When I order, you become guru. He becomes regular guru, that's all. He becomes disciple of my disciple, that's it. Prabhupada, and after a few sentences later, Prabhupada says, concludes this section of the conversation, this topic, by saying, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Amara Agyaya Guruhana, one who understands the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he can become guru, or one who understands his guru's order, the same parampara, he can become guru, and therefore I shall select some of you. Okay, so taking this conversation as it is, I can see where any devotee who just reads this would say, well, Prabhupada said here, he said it would be his disciple. He said it was just a formality because in his physical presence, he talked about grand disciple, and he said he shall select some. So just this conversation, take it as is, I could see how one could conclude, but Prabhupada said that they would become initiating gurus and accept their own disciples, and they would be grand disciples of Prabhupada. Okay, but there's many other things that run contrary to this. We have to look at the whole picture. We can't just look at this. In fact, this conversation didn't come out until years later, when there was all kinds of scandals going on amongst the guru. This system went on for 11 years after Prabhupada's physical departure. These 11 individuals that were named acted as initiating gurus. They accepted grand worshipped, and then there was all kinds of scandals and fall downs and mishaps, and all kinds of crazy stuff was going on. And so that's when they had this guru reform era after 11 years. This is around I believe it was 1988. So from 1977 for 11 years until it was about 10 or 11 years, or maybe 12 years, that this zonal system went on, and there was 11 gurus and 11 zones, and there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. So questions started to arise, and then there was this like guru reform era, so-called guru reform. And it wasn't until then that this May 28th conversation was brought out as some sort of evidence that, here Prabhupada said that, he wanted them to be gurus. Although they actually changed their position, and later they admitted that actually Prabhupada never appointed any gurus. So they contradicted themselves at some point. We're going to look at that also. So this conversation also, another point about this, it has been subjected to forensic analysis, and very expensive to do these reports. These analysis that these were analyzed, these conversations, by professional labs, and the conclusion was that they had been tampered with, they had been edited. So, take it or leave it. I tend to favor that it appears that these were edited, but even if we take it, the conversation as it is, it still does not. When you look at all the other evidences, it does not support that Prabhupada actually authorized them to become initiating gurus. Okay, so we're going to look at each point. So even taking the conversation, what it says as it is, if you look at the first thing Prabhupada says, when they asked him, after his departure, he says here that I shall select some of you to become officiating acharyas. I shall select some of you to act as officiating acharyas, ritvik. Okay, so this is the first thing he says. And the last thing Prabhupada says here, regardless of what is said in between, which is all somewhat ambiguous and bewildering and is questionable as to whether it's actually authentic, the last thing Prabhupada says is, when I order, you become guru. He said they were ready to go on to the next topic. Like here at Satsrup, then we have a next question. They were ready to go on to the next topic, and Prabhupada cut in, and before moving on, he says, when I order, you become guru. He becomes regular guru. Okay, so after that, we have in May, July 9th letter, May, June, July, about a month later, the July 9th letter comes out, and Prabhupada, this is when he gives this, is what is considered to be the order, but the order in this letter in July 9th mentions nothing about anyone initiating their own disciples. It only says that this system, these officiating acharyas, will initiate on Prabhupada's behalf, and this should be the system henceforward. Okay, so this July 9th letter, and again, this conversation, you could go through it line by line. That's what the final order does in the rebuttal to the final order, this book, this 100 Deviations book. They do what is to me a very tedious analysis of line by line and interpreting what each word is. But basically, to just cut to the chase, when you look at the first and last thing that Prabhupada says, It doesn't support, it's contrary to that understanding that he wanted them actually to be initiating gurus. And we're going to look at all the other evidences too that are contrary to that. So, but the letter that follows up does not support, it does not mention anything about them being initiating gurus, that they would initiate their own disciples. The official letter to all GBCs and temple presidents on July 9th only says that Prabhupada would be the spiritual master and that these would be representatives who would conduct the initiation on his behalf. New disciples would be his disciples, and that this system simply should go on henceforward. It doesn't say that it should be ended at any time. Okay, so let's look at the letter that followed up on July 9th to all temple presidents and GBCs. Right here. This is the actual transcription of the letter, penned by Tamal Krishna, but signed, authorized with Prabhupada's signature. Prabhupada authorized every word of this letter to go to all temple presidents and GBCs. To all GBC and temple presidents, dear Maharajas and Prabhus, please accept my humble obeisances at your feet. Recently, when all of the GBC members were with His Divine Grace in Vrindavan, Srila Prabhupada indicated that soon he would appoint some of his senior disciples to act as ritvik, representative of the Acharya, for the purpose of performing initiations, both first initiation and second initiation. His Divine Grace has so far given a list of 11 disciples who will act in that capacity. His Holiness Kirtanananda Swami, Satsarup, Jayapataka, Tamal Krishna, Hridayananda, Bhavananda Hamsaduta, Rameshwar, Harikesh, Bhagavan Das, and His Grace Jayatirtha Das Adhikari. In the past, temple presidents have written to Srila Prabhupada recommending a particular devotee's initiation. Now that Srila Prabhupada has named these representatives, temple presidents may henceforward send recommendation for first and second initiation to whichever of these 11 representatives are nearest their temple. After considering the recommendation, these representatives may accept the devotee as an initiated disciple of Srila Prabhupada by giving a spiritual name, or in the case of second initiation, by chanting on the Gayatri thread, just as Srila Prabhupada has done. The newly initiated devotees are disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the 11 senior devotees acting as his representative. After the temple president receives a letter from these representatives giving the spiritual name on the thread, he can perform the fire yajna in the temple as was being done before. The name of a newly initiated disciple should be sent by the representative who has accepted him or her to Srila Prabhupada to be included in His Divine Grace's Initiated Disciples book. Hoping this finds you well. Approved, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Prabhupada's signature, your servant Tamal Krishna Goswami, Secretary to Srila Prabhupada. Okay, so here it used the word, it says henceforward. Temple presidents may henceforward send recommendations. So it establishes that this system will continue henceforward. Now let's notice that this letter, it doesn't mention anything about anyone initiating their own disciples. It just said that this system should continue from now henceforward. And but at the same time, I will acknowledge it doesn't specify that this would be the system after Prabhupada's departure. So therefore, you still have to look at this letter and look at the conversation and look at so many other points that we're going to go through to put it all into perspective. So, but basically, Prabhupada has given charge each devotee to use their own intelligence and to look at this intelligently, look at the whole subject matter, not just follow blindly or just look at one thing and make a conclusion off of one statement. But this is the official letter. It's a legal document, and it's establishing this system that it should continue henceforward. Now let's go to previous, about a year before. There's several instances where Prabhupada was asked specifically what's going to happen after his departure and how the movement's going to go on, who's going to be the leader, will there be another spiritual master. And so let's notice that Prabhupada, he doesn't say, again, just like in this July 9th letter, he doesn't say that my disciples will initiate their own disciples and become the next gurus. He talks about this system of these zones and these managers, these 18 GBCs. Okay, he talks about a system of management. He doesn't talk about initiating gurus. So here's one of the instances. This is on June 10th, 1976. So just like, maybe a little more than a year before Prabhupada's physical departure, July 9th, a year later actually than this conversation is when he issued a July 9th letter. So this is on June 10th, 1976. Interviewer: what happens when that inevitable time comes when a successor is needed? Rameshwar: he is asking about the future. Who will guide the movement in the future? Prabhupada: they will guide. I am training them. Interviewer: will there be one spiritual leader though? Prabhupada: no. I am training GBC 18 all over the world. Okay, so Prabhupada's referring to these 18 GBC, and each of them was in charge of a certain zone or sector. Here's another conversation with Newsweek that took place on July 14th, 1976. This was just a year before the July 9th letter, basically. So this is with Newsweek magazine. Interviewer: I was wondering if you had a successor to do you have a successor to take your place when you die? Prabhupada: not yet settled up, not yet settled up. Interviewer: so what process with the Hare Krishnas? Prabhupada: we have got secretaries, they are managing. Rameshwar: he has appointed from all the disciples a group of secretaries. Each one is in charge of a different sector of the world. Interviewer: how many secretaries? Rameshwar: presently there is 18. Interviewer: and so that group of 18 secretaries will choose another leader? Prabhupada: I am training each one of them as leaders so they can spread extensively. That is my idea. Okay, so here again, Prabhupada, he gives us, just talks about a system of these 18 zones and these secretaries they're going to manage. So then only a year later, he issues a letter, this July 9th letter, naming those 11 individuals, and they would be in charge. Each would have their own zone, and the letter outlines that they would do it on his behalf. So Prabhupada has already indicated here a year before that this was the system that would carry on in his physical, after his physical departure. Okay? Now, let's go to 3 years later, after 1977. This is about 3 years after Prabhupada's physical departure. This zonal system was going on, only instead of, them acting as representatives, you have these 11 persons acting as initiating gurus, accepting full grand worship. And there's all kinds of things were going on with like competition going on, and there was just some contention between Tamal Krishna and other GBC members, and probably other persons who are also aspiring for this position to become an initiating guru. So they had limited it to these 11 up until then. So now let's go to Tamal Krishna is making this acknowledgement, this admission that Prabhupada never authorized any initiating gurus. He says it right here. This is in 1980. I've had certain realization a few days ago. There are obviously so many statements by Srila Prabhupada that his Guru Maharaj did not appoint any successors. Even in Srila Prabhupada's books, he says Guru means by qualification. The inspiration came because there was a questioning on my part, so Krishna spoke. Actually, Prabhupada never appointed any gurus. He appointed 11 ritviks. He never appointed them gurus. Myself and the other GBC have done the greatest disservice to this movement the last 3 years because we interpreted the appointment of ritviks as the appointment of gurus. What actually happened, I'll explain. I explained it, but the interpretation is wrong. What actually happened was that Prabhupada mentioned that he might be appointing some ritviks, so the GBC met for various reasons, and they went to Prabhupada, 5 or 6 of us. We asked him, Srila Prabhupada, after your departure, if we accept disciples, whose disciples will they be, your disciples or mine? Later on, there was a piled up list of people to get initiated, and it was jammed up. I said, Srila Prabhupada, you once mentioned about ritviks. I don't know what to do. We want to approach you, but there's hundreds of devotees named, and I'm just holding all the letters. I don't know what you want to do. Srila Prabhupada said, all right, I will appoint so many. And he started to name them. He made it very clear that they are his disciples. At that point, it was very clear in my mind that they were his disciples. Later, I asked him 2 questions. One, what about Brahmananda Swami? I asked him this because I happen to have an affection for Brahmananda Swami. So Srila Prabhupada said, no, not unless he is qualified. Before I get ready to type the July 9th letter, I asked him, too, Srila Prabhupada, is this all or do you want to add more? He said, as is necessary, others may be added. Now I understand that what he did was very clear. He was physically incapable of performing the function of initiation. Therefore, he appointed officiating priests to initiate on his behalf. This is very important because when it comes to initiating, It isn't whoever is nearest, it's wherever your heart goes. Who you repose your faith on, you take initiation from him. But when it's officiating, it's whoever is nearest, and he was very clear. He named them. They were spread out all over the world, and he said, whoever you're nearest, you just approach that person and they'll check you out. Then on my behalf, they'll initiate. It is not a question that you repose your faith in that person, nothing. That's a function for the guru. In order for me to manage this movement, Prabhupada said, I have to form a GBC, and I will appoint the following people. In order to continue the process of people joining our movement and getting initiated, I have to appoint some priests to help me because I cannot physically manage everyone myself. And that's all it was, and it was never any more than that. You can bet your bottom dollar that Prabhupada would have spoken for days and hours and weeks on end about how to set up this thing with the gurus, because he had already said it a million times. He said, my Guru Maharaj did not appoint anyone. It's by qualification. We made a great mistake. I feel that this realization or this understanding is essential if we are to avoid further things happening, because believe me, it's going to repeat. It's just a question of time until things have a little bit faded out, and again, another incident is going to happen. Whether it's here or in LA or somewhere else. It's going to continuously happen until you allow the actual spiritual force of Krishna to be exhibited without restriction. I feel that the GBC, if they don't adopt this point very quickly, if they don't realize this truth, you cannot show me anything on tape or in writing where Prabhupada says, I appoint these 11 as gurus. It does not exist because he never appointed any gurus. This is a myth. So they used this May 28th conversation to establish that Prabhupada appointed them as gurus, and then followed it up with appointed them in the July 9th letter. Yet here Tamal Krishna admits that he says, you cannot show me anywhere in writing or in tape because it doesn't exist. He never appointed any gurus. So this is completely contrary. Tamal Krishna denies that Prabhupada ever appointed them as gurus. So then, but then yet he still went on to act. They came to some compromise. And when he talked about incidences, he was talking about gurus falling down and mishaps and scandals and all these things that were going on. So this is how somehow he was forced to acknowledge this under pressure. But yet he's again made some negotiation or compromise and continued to act as one of these zonal gurus for another, I think, 8 or 9 years. This was more or less swept under the carpet. This conversation was recorded. It came out sometime later, and when the whole thing collapsed, the whole zonal system was done away with. This was discovered. This information came out. There was a recording. So Tamal Krishna had admitted it, that Prabhupada never, he defies basically this conclusion that on May 28th Prabhupada appointed them. Yet he continued to act as initiating guru for years, as a zonal guru for years afterwards, and then onward after when they did the multiple guru system. And ultimately his life was ended in a fatal car accident, which is a wonder if someone was serving Lord Krishna, sincere, honestly. But it seemed that Tamal Krishna was spearheaded this derailment, this sort of deviation of the movement, and he met with a tragic ending, in a fatal car accident. So one would wonder, why would that happen to someone who is honestly serving? So this all runs contrary. This all runs contrary to this conclusion. And now we'll go to where Back to Godhead and the editors, the leaders of the spokespersons of Iskcon, some years later, they admit that this whole idea was false, that Prabhupada appointed any gurus. This was admitted in a Back to Godhead magazine. Now let's take a look at that. So this is reprinted from Back to Godhead, January-February 1991 issue. So 1980, so this was 1991, so approximately for maybe another 10 years, this zonal system went on. It seems that it went on for, I guess, about from 1977 until about 1990 or around this time. In the difficult times after Srila Prabhupada departed from this world, Misunderstandings arose on a crucial issue: who would be the next spiritual master? Srila Prabhupada had clearly taught that he wanted all his disciples to follow his teachings, teach them to others, and thus become spiritual masters. But by the influence of Maya illusion, a different idea soon evolved, that Srila Prabhupada had appointed 11 pure devotees to serve as the gurus after him. These 11, the idea went, should each serve as the spiritual master for a specific geographical zone of the world. This zonal guru system, as it came to be called, prevailed in Iskcon for about 10 years until its falseness became clear and an ever-growing reform movement overthrew it and reasserted Srila Prabhupada's original instructions. In 1986, Iskcon's governing body, Commission, formally dismantled the system. In the years till then, Back to Godhead sometimes reflected and supported the erroneous zonal guru system. Here, therefore, we wish to admit this mistake. I was the managing editor for some of those years, and Satsrup Das Maharaj was editor-in-chief. He joins me in apologizing to our readers for BTG's conformity to the zonal guru error. In particular, we express our heartfelt apologies for contributing to the hurts and wrongs devotees endured when Iskcon diverged from Srila Prabhupada's instructions. May Lord Krishna henceforward keep us straight on the path of Krishna consciousness as Srila Prabhupada taught it. Hare Krishna Jayadvaita Swami, editor-in-chief. So they went on to the so-called guru reform. Actually, rather than implementing this zonal system properly according to Prabhupada's instructions, and where he talked about these representatives, and according to what he gave in the July 9th letter, which simply, says that they should be ritvik officiating acharyas initiated on his behalf. Instead of doing it on his behalf, they totally stopped the zones, and they just started rubber stamping more gurus. So now they introduced this election process where Prabhupada said an initiating spiritual master is never to be elected. But they started now electing gurus, more gurus. They said instead of limiting it to just 11, let's have like as many as we can elect. So that now they have 100 plus something. And gurus or fall downs and mishaps and scandals have continued to happen continuously since. It's never stopped because they never actually implemented the system. Now, where did they get this idea for the zonal system? Why did it go on for 10, 12 years? Because that was Prabhupada's instruction. Prabhupada wanted a zonal system. He told there should be zones and there should be representatives. That's where they got the whole idea of a zonal system in the first place. So instead of properly implementing the zonal system, they totally disregarded it, and they went on to rubber stamp and vote in more and more gurus, and yet still fall downs continued to happen. And yet they still haven't, to this day in 2022 or 2022, the system has never been rectified. Let's now jump to another statement by Jayadvaita some years later, after this so-called guru reform, where he then acknowledges that there was so many fall downs going on. And ironically, however, even though he acknowledges this, he still continues to insist on supporting this multiple initiator guru system where gurus are voted in. So here's Jayadvaita Swami's statement years later. Okay, and it says, fact, Iskcon gurus in good standing have fallen. Fact, the Iskcon GBC has supported even fallen gurus and tried to paper over their fall downs. Fact, Iskcon gurus have opposed, oppressed, and driven out many sincere God brothers and God sisters. Fact, Iskcon gurus have usurped and misused money and diverted other Iskcon resources for their own personal prestige and sense gratification. Fact, this is the one that really hits home. Iskcon gurus have had illicit sexual intercourse with both women and men, and possibly children as well. Fact, some Iskcon gurus still in good standing have had such serious personal difficulties that the GBC has been obliged to suspend them from initiating. Fact, other Iskcon gurus have snapped back into line only after narrow misses. Fact, in any case, it goes on and on, etc., etc. I think we've all heard enough already. And ironically, Jayadvaita Swami also happens to be the main editors of Prabhupada's books. This is a whole nother subject matter, but Prabhupada's books have been changed many, many times. Thousands and thousands of changes have been going on. It's a whole nother subject matter that when you analyze that, you don't find the evidence where Prabhupada authorized all these changes. So Jayadvaita Swami changing Prabhupada's books and arguing in favor, although at the same time acknowledging that the zonal system, they had all these mishaps, and then years later again acknowledging their so-called reform is still a bunch of fall downs and mishaps of even sexual misconduct, homosex, child abuse, and all kinds of these things have all gone on for years. There's been under the oversight of all these initiating gurus of Iskcon, there's been so much, all kinds of crazy stuff that has gone on. There's been cases of murders, there's been child abuse, etc. So when you look at the history of the original 11 and why they came to the point of doing this so-called reform, because there was some crazy stuff that happened with amongst these 11. Not all of them were completely grossly exposed, but several of them were exposed in. There was allegation of homosex. One, Kirtanananda Swami was actually charged with crime of racketeering, and there was so much allegations of child abuses going on under these gurus, and even homosex. There's a statement of Bhavananda is one. There's an online statement where he admits of these allegations of homosex to be true. There is actually a video online that shows that. And there was one devotee was murdered for trying to expose these gurus. Solochan, there's a book called Monkey on the Stick, which gives the history of that, where this devotee was actually murdered because he was trying to expose these gurus. And there was just so much crazy stuff that happened. There was actually one of the other gurus, again, which was, or so-called gurus. Yeah, it was actually Jayatirtha was decapitated by one of the followers. The story was that he was engaged, having an affair with this man's wife, and this man just went psycho and decapitated Jayatirtha. So then you had all kinds of crazy stuff. Hamsaduta also had like a bit of a wild time, with stories of guns and alcohol and kind of crazy stuff. But he came to his senses and acknowledged afterwards that Prabhupada we should have initiated on behalf of Prabhupada. And he went on to acknowledge, to inform all of the devotees that they were Prabhupada's disciples. So he came clean and he fessed up, fortunately, before passing on. So this was all the kind of wild and crazy, wild west stuff that was going on, that they said, oh, we got to do something about this. And they had the so-called reform movement, which never rectified the system, never actually put the system in proper order, but just went on to instead rubber stamp more, vote in more gurus. And here we have, again, Iskcon's official spokesman acknowledging that still so many crazy things are going on. Gurus are engaged in homosex, illicit sex with men and women, and even all kinds of child abuse cases going on. Now we are in 2022 here, in June of 2022. And even recently we've had Lokanath Swami. You could find the letter there online where he admits of child molestation of a young girl that was. Here we have a sannyasi who was acting as an initiating spiritual master, and people consider him to be very senior because he's been around for so many years. But yet it came out, and he actually admitted and acknowledged, the letter is there online, that he had molested this young girl who was only very young at the time, well under 18. She was a very, very young girl. So later years, this girl came out and told about it, and then it came to, he was pressured and he had to admit. So he was only given a little slap on the wrist and put on like a sort of temporary probation with the possibility of again being reinstated after some time. So this is the system that Iskcon currently has, is of allowing men that still have all kinds of material motives and material desires, sex desire, to act in this position. Again, we had Gunagrahi, some years before he passed away, wrote a letter to the devotees, and he felt guilty that he was initiating devotees all these years. This was just before he was about to pass away. His conscience hit him, and he acknowledged that he had been addicted to pornography all these years. And even when he was exposed as a sannyas with pornography, it was brought to the attention of the GBC, and he was maybe temporarily reprimanded, and then only a few years later he was given the crown. He was elected in as an initiating spiritual master, and he continued to initiate his own disciples. But then later, before he passed away with, I believe it was prostate cancer, he acknowledged that, I've been still addicted to pornography all these years. So this has been going on. Nothing has changed. This is the current Iskcon system, and yet this book insists that Prabhupada wanted, authorized initiating spiritual masters. Now let's look at some of the statements of Prabhupada in his books, where he's very emphatic that only a pure devotee who's a Mahabhagavat on the first level, a first-class pure devotee, should accept this position of initiating spiritual master. And one of the particular reasons is because he is to be worshipped as good as God. Here he says, a guru is worshipped just like my disciples. They're offering respect exactly like God. That is their duty. Shakshad ritvik samasta shastre. All the Shastra recommends that gurus should be respected as good as God. Here from Krishna book, according to scriptural injunctions, a spiritual master should be respected and be regarded on an equal level with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Of course, we're talking about initiating spiritual master, because a Shiksha guru does not have to be a pure devotee. Anybody can basically be a Shiksha guru. Even a child, it is said, can do that just by saying Krishna is God. One does not have to be perfect. There's not any particular qualification to be a preacher or a Shiksha guru, an instructor. But the initiator guru, he must be a pure devotee, because he's taking the karmas of the initiated disciples. He has to be able to absorb those karma, and he is to be worshipped as good as God. And initiating devotees must have only one initiating spiritual master, because that is the primary recipient of all their devotion and prayers, and they are to be worshipped as good as God. It is recommended in authoritative scriptures that spiritual masters should be worshipped on the level of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because of his being his very confidential servitor. And it is accepted by great authorities that the spiritual master is the external manifestation of Krishna. Krishna book 46. Our next spiritual master is he who initiates us into transcendental knowledge, and he is to be worshipped as much as I am. This is the words of Lord Krishna himself. Worshipped as much as I am. The spiritual master who initiates the disciple is called diksha guru. This is from Lord Krishna in Krishna book, chapter 80. Here is in a lecture of Prabhupada. What is the symptom of a bona fide spiritual master? Everyone wants to become spiritual master. He has taken shelter of the supreme absolute truth without any material desires. He has no more any material desires. He's simply interested in Krishna, or the absolute truth. No material desires, no sex desires, no desires for fame and worship and name and fame and position and followers. Nadanam najanam nasundrim, as we pray every day. Next statement from Madhya 24.331 purport. When one has attained the topmost position of Mahabhagavat, he is to be accepted as a guru and worshipped exactly like Hare, the personality of Godhead. Only such a person is eligible to occupy the post of a guru. Okay? And one more from Madhya Lila. The guru must be situated on the topmost platform of devotional service. There are 3 classes of devotees, and the guru must be accepted from the topmost class. The first class devotee is a spiritual master for all kinds of people. So this next verse is very essential to understand in light of all the other evidences that we're giving here, because here it's like as if Prabhupada gives some kind of concession. He's kind of like, all right, well, he can accept disciples if he's not first class, but one should not even become. We already just read that only a first class devotee should become a guru. This is the higher understanding. But if you want to take like a lesser understanding, then you can interpret it like this. It says one should not become a spiritual master. One should not become a spiritual master unless he has attained the platform of Uttama Adhikari. Okay, clear. Only a first-class devotee. A neophyte Vaishnava or a Vaishnava situated on the intermediate platform can also accept disciples, but such disciples must be on the same platform, and it should be understood that they cannot advance very well toward the ultimate goal of life under his insufficient guidance. Therefore, a disciple should be careful to accept an Uttama Adhikari as a spiritual master. So in this is a unique verse because Prabhupada, it's somewhat contrary to all the other statements where Prabhupada says only a first-class devotee. Like it's almost contrary to the first sentence there, which says one should not even become a spiritual master unless he has attained the platform of Uttama Adhikari. But then Prabhupada, like in the next sentence, he sort of makes a concession that like a second-class devotee, he can also accept disciples, but it's not recommended. Okay, so what do you want to do? You want to follow something that Prabhupada doesn't actually recommend, or you want to follow his pure instructions? So this is the position GBC has taken, is basically interpreting this according to their own, sense gratification, more or less, and saying that, well, Prabhupada says here, they try to use the May 28th conversation to say Prabhupada wanted them to be initiating gurus, and they'll use a verse like this to say, oh, they can also accept disciples. They kind of skip over the other statements that this is sandwiched between. This statement is like a sandwich, in between is that sort of concession, but on both the top and the bottom, it says one shouldn't even become a guru, and then one shouldn't even accept such a guru because his guidance is insufficient. And in this regard here, Prabhupada says, the difficulty is sometimes things are interpreted in a manner dovetailing one's own sense gratification. I have got this personal experience in my Guru Maharaj's institution. Different godbrothers took the words of Guru Maharaj in different interpretations for sense gratification, and the whole mission disrupted. This is still going on for the last 40 years without any proper settlement. I am always afraid of this crack, but I am sure if our aim is to serve Krishna sincerely and the spiritual master simultaneously, that will be our success. So Prabhupada was already indicating, let's not make the same mistake that the Gaudiya Math did, but this is exactly what has happened. In this regard, several statements Prabhupada referred to the Gaudiya Math as deviating. After the departure of Bhaktisiddhanta, he said the GBC Bhaktisiddhanta never authorized the GBC to vote in any gurus, but they voted in, basically they selected them, and let's not make the same mistake. He says here, if everyone just initiates, then there will only be a contradictory result. As long as it goes on, there will be only failure. Shame, my dear godbrothers. Aren't you embarrassed? In the manner of businessmen, you increase your disciples. The one who renounces the Guru's order, Guru Tyagi, and the one who tries to enjoy the assets of his spiritual master are two kinds of useless persons. First, become a servant of your spiritual master, and then you will understand things clearly. So things have not been understood very clearly, unfortunately. And they interpreted Prabhupada's instructions for sense gratification. Another statement here about the Gaudiya Math. In the latter days of my Guru Maharaj, he was very disgusted. Actually, he left this world earlier. Otherwise, he would have continued to live for more years. Still, he requested his disciples to form a strong governing body for preaching the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He never recommended anyone to be Acharya of the Gaudiya Math, but Sridhar Maharaj is responsible for disobeying this order of Guru Maharaj, and he and others who are already dead unnecessarily thought there must be one Acharya. If Guru Maharaj could have seen someone who was qualified at that time to be Acharya, he would have mentioned. Because on the night before he passed away, he talked of so many things, but he never mentioned an Acharya. His idea was Acharya was not to be nominated amongst the governing body. He said openly, you make a GBC and conduct a mission. So his idea was amongst the members of GBC who would come out successful and self-effulgent Acharya would be automatically selected. So Sridhar Maharaj and his two associate gentlemen unauthorizedly selected one Acharya, and later it proved a failure. The result is now everyone is claiming to be Acharya, even though they may be Kanishta Adhikari with no ability to preach. In some of the camps, the Acharya is being changed 3 times a year. Therefore, we may not commit the same mistake in our Iskcon camp. Actually, amongst my godbrothers, no one is qualified to become Acharya. So it is better not to mix with my godbrothers very intimately, because instead of inspiring our students and disciples, they may sometimes pollute them. So here again, so many points. Prabhupada warned, let us not make the same mistake. He said, Guru, the GBC is not to nominate or elect gurus, which is what they've done. And they've exactly followed in the footsteps of the Gaudiya Math. They exactly made all the same mistakes. In fact, Tamal Krishna is known that he went to associate with these god brothers that Prabhupada advised not to associate with, because he said that they may sometimes pollute them. Well, this is exactly what happened. Tamal Krishna Maharaj, just in the same way that Prabhupada said his god brother Sridhar Maharaj deviated the movement, in the same way Tamal Krishna went and associated with these same persons and took up this very same ideas. And they just went on to rubber stamp gurus, vote gurus in, although Prabhupada clearly said the guru should never be voted by the GBC. In Adi Leela, Prabhupada states, Sri Jiva Goswami advises that one not accept a spiritual master in terms of hereditary or customary social and ecclesiastical conventions. So again, this is the same thing. Ironically, GBC has defined itself as the highest ecclesiastical board of Iskcon. So exactly, this is in reference to GBC. Prabhupada says GBC is never to voting gurus, yet they say that this is they are following the tradition, and that the ritvik system is not the tradition, and that they're doing the tradition. Well, there's no tradition. Prabhupada denies that there's any tradition of voting in gurus. He says that is not authorized, and says that none of his god brothers were qualified, though they say that the tradition is that disciples automatically have the right to initiate their own disciples when their guru is physically departed. So Prabhupada also denies that here, because he said all of his god brothers were not qualified, even though Bhaktisiddhanta was already physically departed. Yet he said all of his god brothers were not qualified. So the physical absence of the guru is not the only requirement to become a qualified initiated spiritual master. One has to be a pure devotee. One has to be authorized with a direct order from their spiritual master. And the spiritual master has to be physically departed. And that is why it is said here in the Madhya Lila purport of the very verse Amara Jnana Guru, which Iskcon uses so much to insist that this verse means that one is given an order, that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is given this order. We have to go out and initiate disciples. This is the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, to become an initiating guru. Well, in the very purport to that verse, it states right here, it is best not to accept any disciples. One has to become purified at home by chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and preaching the principles enunciated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Thus one can become a spiritual master and be freed from the contamination of material life. So becoming a spiritual master, the order of Amara Jnana Guru is moreover referring to just becoming a preacher, becoming a spiritual master as a preacher, not by initiating your own disciples, sitting on a big throne and being worshipped as good as God. That position is reserved for the first-class Mahabhagavat, one who is factually as good as God, one who is free from all material desires and motives. So this is the order, is to be a preacher, to be a teacher, to be a preacher, and you can initiate on behalf. To officiate means to do it the initiation is done on behalf of Prabhupada, on behalf of the pure spiritual master, the initiator. So in conclusion, one may ask, well, why didn't, I've asked myself, I've asked this question, and I've contemplated on this, and I believe this is to clarify in this point why the question is, why didn't Prabhupada just, point blank on May 28th say, they will be my disciples. I will be the initiator, spiritual master. I will remain the initiator for Iskcon into the future, even after my physical departure. Why doesn't he specify that on May 28th and in the July 9th letter? Well, the spiritual master is charging us, Prabhupada is charging each and every devotee to use their own intelligence, not to follow just blindly. And this is sort of a test of one's sincerity, one's intelligence, and one's inquiry. To be a disciple, one must inquire. This is an important part of discipleship, is inquiries, asking questions, not just blindly following. So, we have to inquire by reading Prabhupada's books, listening to all his words, and studying his his teachings, and requires us to inquire as what is a true spiritual master. That's why Prabhupada said there, he concluded on May 28th, where he says, one who understands the order of the spiritual master, he can become a spiritual master. He is an actual true guru. We also should mention before coming to this conclusion of why this has been arranged like Krishna in this way that requires us, instead of just slapping us in the face very clearly, black and white, oh, this is what Prabhupada wants. It requires us to look into his teachings and to try to inquire. There's these two other points that I wanted to point out. One is that there's many of the tapes in those last final days of Prabhupada were disappeared mysteriously. The allegation is that they were burned up in a fire. There were under the care of Tamal Krishna, that these tapes were annihilated in a fire. But even if that is not a fact, if we don't have the evidence of that, the fact is that the tapes are missing. There's a huge chunk of time. It was known that Prabhupada was being recorded like 24/7 in the last his final days before his departure, and yet most of those tapes you'll find when you look through the tape collection, the recordings, all that was missing. So likely there's a lot of things that Prabhupada did say about this. There was more information, and it was disregarded. So, but regardless of that, we still have plenty of evidence that this was the system. This was what actually makes much more sense when you put it all together, is that Prabhupada has intended this system to carry on. He said it when they asked him what would the future be, how would the system go on. He said there would be the zonal system. They knew that Prabhupada wanted zones. For 12 years they had a zonal system, and on and on. So many evidences. Let's look also at Prabhupada's will. In Prabhupada's will it states, the system of management will continue as it is now, and there's no need of any change. Each new executive director for the Iskcon properties must be my initiated disciple. So to be Prabhupada's initiated disciple, this can be satisfied by carrying on the ritvik system. Will continue to initiate new generations of Prabhupada's disciples. There was a devotee who contested that he was there at this time, and Prabhupada wanted the words. It just originally said an initiated disciple, and Prabhupada said, no, I want my initiated disciple, very specific. So even if that's not a fact, it's taking the word as it is, what's stated in this legal document for the future of Iskcon, for as long as Iskcon exists. It says the executive directors must be Prabhupada's initiated disciples. So this is another evidence by Krishna's arrangement that we have to take into account. And we'll take a look at the conclusion now. Why would have Krishna arranged it in such a way that requires us to use a little bit of intelligence? Let's go to Adi Lila. And here it says, this is the actual text of Adi Lila in Adi Lila. At first, all the followers of Advaita Acharya shared a single opinion, but later they followed two different opinions as ordained by providence. That means it's by Krishna's will that they split up into two different camps. It was for whatever reason. We don't always know what is God's plan, but for whatever reason, Krishna wanted even the followers of Advaita Acharya were split up. So here in the purport, Prabhupada says, the words Devara Karna indicate that by dint of providence or by God's will, the followers of Advaita Acharya divided into two parties. Such disagreement among the disciples of one Acharya is also found among the members of the Gaudiya Math. In the beginning, during the presence of Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajak Acharya, Astotara Sata Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, all the disciples worked in agreement, but just after his disappearance, they disagreed. One party strictly followed the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, but another group created their own concoction about executing his desires. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, at the time of his departure, requested all his disciples to form a governing body and conduct missionary activities cooperatively. He did not instruct a particular man to become the next Acharya. But just after his passing away, his leading secretaries made plans without authority to occupy the post of Acharya, and they split in two factions over who the next Acharya would be. Consequently, both factions were asara, or useless, because they had no authority, having disobeyed the order of the spiritual master. So isn't it ironic how history repeats itself? And Prabhupada gave all these indicators of what could happen, And what he forewarned of happened exactly in the same way that the Gaudiya Math. But ironically, it says ordained by providence. This is all happening by Krishna's will for some reason or other. That can be a little hard to understand, but sometimes we can't always understand what is the Lord's ultimate plan. We have to be able to see the big picture. So here, for some reason, the Lord has, and Prabhupada, working through Prabhupada, has created this sort of, this division, this of two sides, two parties, two opinions. And it's up to you to make your choice. If you're going to follow, the side that takes the interpretation over the side that Prabhupada said was deviated from Bhaktisiddhanta, Iskcon has done exactly all the same things that the Gaudiya Math did, which Prabhupada said were deviated after Bhaktisiddhanta's departure. Well, we'll just conclude this by reading this last statement of Prabhupada in May 7th. Happened to be just a few days before that May 28th conversation. So Prabhupada says, "So there is nothing new to be said. Whatever I have to speak, I have spoken in my books. Now you try to understand it and continue in your endeavor. Whether I am present or not present, it doesn't matter." So basically, Prabhupada says it here. He's given everything in his books. It doesn't matter if he's physically present. He's given us everything. He's set up a system to initiate on his behalf. And it's up to us to follow his instructions and use our intelligence and to follow everything that he's given us. So again, that is a test of devotees' sincerity. Most devotees are just going to flock to, follow the popular opinion and go along with the current Iskcon system of voting in gurus, rubber stamping men. It doesn't matter how many will continue to fall down. That's the system they've established, and the following in the so-called tradition that the Gaudiya Math has followed, in which Prabhupada said had deviated, Iskcon decided to go that route instead of taking up this system of initiating on behalf of Prabhupada and keeping Prabhupada as the initiator for the entire of Iskcon. And as one, every devotee should have only one initiating spiritual master. That would be the uniting factor for all of Iskcon if all devotees had the same unified under the same initiating spiritual master and worshiping. The spiritual master is to be worshipped. So instead of devotees all worshiping in their own groups, everybody worships together, worshiping, glorifying Prabhupada as the pure devotee, the undisputed pure devotee. At least if anyone is a pure devotee, we can all agree on that much, that Prabhupada is a pure devotee. Other persons, who knows? Who knows if there is any other actual pure devotees? An actual first-class Uttama Adhikari is very rare. Even it says in the Bhagavad Gita that one of thousands and thousands, truly, Krishna Lord says, knows me in truth. So it's not to say that Prabhupada, they use the argument, they're saying that Prabhupada couldn't make pure devotees and so on. No, we're saying that it's not such an easy thing. It's not such a cheap thing. And Prabhupada can make pure devotees. And Prabhupada said the same thing about his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta. He said none of his god brothers were qualified. Okay, so what you're saying, Prabhupada said. So it's the same thing. We're just taking the high standard that Prabhupada has given us and not making it a cheap thing, a Krishna consciousness that, any man can be worshipped as a god, even though he is addicted to pornography or molesting young girls and so on. And let's stay with the high standard that Prabhupada has given us and take the higher understanding, the higher teaching that Prabhupada has given us, not make a lesser interpretation according to our sense gratification. So thank you for listening, and Hare Krishna, and all glories to Srila Prabhupada.